Cameroon. BBC World Service News.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Dimbleby, and this is World Questions, which comes from Rome, the capital of Italy, the capital of Catholicism, and once the capital of Western civilization as well. We're here with our partners, the British Council, a few metres from the Spanish Steps and in the heart of Italy's political world, close by the presidential palace, the Prime Minister's office, the Parliament, and the Senate. Italian politics is all about us. This world was turned upside down a short time ago when, by a large margin, the voters rejected the Prime Minister's plans for constitutional reform in a nationwide referendum. Matteo Renzi claimed that his changes were needed for Italy to break out of its parliamentary gridlock. Without them, he claimed, it would be impossible for his government to tackle Italy's deep and endemic social and economic problems. Italy remains, though, one of the biggest economies in the world. But its banking crisis, its huge levels of debt, its unemployment, its plunging birth rate, soaring migration from North Africa across the Mediterranean, 160,000 people just about last year, not to mention corruption on an industrial scale. All these pose an enormous challenge for the 60 million Italians and their political leaders. What's to be done? With me and our audience, Sandro Gozzi is a member of the Democratic Party. He's a minister who works closely with the Prime Minister and has special responsibility for European affairs. Deborah Bergamini is a powerful voice in the Chamber of Deputies as a member of Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia. Manlio Di Stefano is also in the chamber as a leading light in the Five Stars movement, which is posing a major challenge to Italy's established political parties. And Natalie Tocci, she has an international reputation as chief advisor to the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, or more colloquially, its foreign minister. And we will go straight, please, to our first question from Lucilia Francetti. Your question, please.
My question is, why did Italians vote no in the referendum? I mean, it's crazy. Did we really know what we were voting for? If I asked around to my friends, he was voting no for one reason. Another one was voting no for another reason. And we didn't, it was a mess.
Okay, we'll get, I hope, 4 answers to explain why they think this is the case. Sandro Gozzi, first of all, Minister.
Well, there is an answer already in your question, because the vast majority of Italians didn't vote on the constitutional text, but they vote considering the economic, social, and political context, which is very often happens in the referenda, and it was obviously the major reason that moved so many Italians going to the polls, which was certainly a very good fact, because the fact that we had almost 70% of Italians which decided to go and vote for the referendum was certainly a very good sign for democracy. Unfortunately, they didn't vote on the constitutional text, but they voted because they were not satisfied with the general context.
Totally out of touch, it seems, to demonstrate your Prime Minister and your party was that you didn't recognise that by putting your political life on the line, you're going to be out of office along with a whole lot of other Prime Ministers over the last heaven knows how many years since the end of the Second World War.
Well, of course, there is something which is very new for Italian politics. Which, we have had a former Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, who has assumed the political accountability for the loss of the referendum. And for the first time in the history of the Italian Republic, he did what he had said he would do.
Manlio Di Stefano from the Five Stars movement, you played a very important part in securing the no vote. Why did Italians vote no?
Well, Italians vote for no because they realize that they don't want to lose their own right to vote for the Senate and to give more power to the old politics. That's what they voted for. Obviously, there was a part of them voting not on the constitutional reform, but the same I could say about the yes voters, and voting against Mr. Renzi. This is true. He was himself saying that this vote was on him. And you never do something for people's welfare, but always for the financial institutions and for your own establishment friends. People recognize it, and at the first time that they can, they'll make you pay for this.
Deborah Bergamini, from
Correct.
Forza Italia.
I think that Matteo Renzi made a couple of mistakes because he kept the country stuck for a very long time all around this constitutional reform. He seemed to have lost touch with the real needs of his own people, of Italians. And he made the mistake of personalizing upon himself the future outcome of this referendum.
Talk about personalizing.
Also, if I can add one
just
thing.
while we're on personalizing, no one more personalized politics in Italy than the leader of your party, Silvio Berlusconi.
But one thing is personalizing politics, and I may say many things regarding this. I think you're playing on a stereotype that is not really correct regarding the whole very long experience of Berlusconi in politics. Also, Berlusconi was elected as prime minister. Renzi was not elected as a prime minister. And we tried, Forza Italia tried to reform the constitution. And we learned about that experience. That was back in 2005.
So is it not reformable then?
The mistake of Renzi was two things. First, he wanted to impose the reform of the constitution doing all by himself and not sharing it with all the other political forces. And then he gave the impression to Italians that he was more interested in reforming the constitution than in reforming Italians' lives.
Let me bring in Natalie Tocci here from the European Union, as well as obviously being Italian. How did you read the decision of the electorate in Italy?
I mean, my reading is that the decision had mainly to do, indeed, with issues that are not related to the Constitution. Come out in the open, I myself read the reform of the I consider myself to be a fairly educated person. I myself read the constitutional reform about 10 days before the referendum. And I spent a whole weekend doing it and studying it, opinions pro and against. How many people actually did that? I must say that both on the yes and on the no side, politics did an awful job at explaining the reasons for and against. If you look at the demographics and also the geographical breakdown of the vote, it emerges fairly obviously that young people voted against. Over, 70% voted against, and mainly the South voted. I mean, I'm simplifying here.
Yeah.
So what is it that makes us think that for some reason young people have a particular reading of the constitutional reform, or people living in southern Italy have a particular reading of the constitutional reform? This obviously has to do with the fact that there is malaise amongst this age group and amongst particular geographical areas of the country. It has not to do with the Constitution. Now, there is a point related to the Constitution. It has to do with the fact that, generally speaking, Italians are very attached to their Constitution. They actually think it's a pretty good document, if you like. And they don't, I would say, broadly speaking, they don't consider the main problems of the country as being related to the Constitution. Now, they may be mistaken, but that is the general gist, if you like, and feeling in the country.
Let us go on the basis of that to our next question, which comes from Chiara Giuliani.
Which kind of political and economic measures can be taken by policymakers in order to address the increasing rate of unemployment of young people and of the lower middle class?
Unemployment of the young and of the lower middle class, as you put it. For those who are listening to this programme around the world, unemployment of young people in this country approaches 40%. And there is also, I touched on it at the very beginning, there is what's described as a banking crisis, and I think the indebtedness of the Italian government is to the tune of something 2.5 trillion US dollars. On this, first of all, what kind of measures? Manlio Di Stefano, what would you say what you don't like as the Five Stars movement? What would you do to achieve a solution to the problem that Chiara's just raised?
Well, we can start, for example, talking about what is so-called green jobs, meaning to put all your strength to create jobs related to reconstruction and maintenance of buildings. And what we can say is that up to the statistics, if you put your money on the conversion of the buildings to green and sustainable new structure, you will grant more jobs than other kind of activities.
And where do you get the money for that?
well, from the state. So, for example, in the last month, the government took 20 billion euros to fix the banking system for the Monte dei Paschi di Siena bank issue. And they used the increasing of the debt. So you can do it. You can do to restart the Italian
if you do that, if you decide to spend more, I mentioned the 2.5 trillion dollar debt, and you say, right, it's more public spending. Isn't that going to increase the bank's problem and therefore increase Italy's economic problem to a point where it becomes really quite disturbing?
No, I don't think so. I think that you just need to find the right place where you put your money when you create that. We were talking before about the Renzi government. During the Renzi government, the debt has increased of 40 billions. So it means that you created some more debts, but you put it on the wrong part of the economic restart. So you can use that money for better things. That's the point.
Okay. Minister, Sandra.
Well, we have introduced a major reform, which we call Jobs Act, which has already produced positive results, because when you talk about unemployment, we have to talk about the figures. The figures are certainly not satisfying, but are better than 2 years ago, are better than when the Renzi government started to be in power, because we went down from 13% overall unemployment to around 11%, if I'm not mistaken. And this is already a positive result. We introduced a reform which fight much against a real disease in the Italian society, which is a precarious job for youth.
But what is proposed by 5 Stars?
This is not up to statistics.
Is that you borrow more in order to spend more. With your proposal, I might ask him the same question. With your proposal, how quickly do you reduce youth unemployment, which is a great scar in Italy?
It is clear that it takes time, and it takes time for 2 reasons. The first, that Italy has wasted at least 15 years in not carrying out those structural reforms in the labor market, which were absolutely necessary, and, for example, which Germany introduced under the Schroeder government. Second reason, that we have had to introduce reform after a major financial and economic crisis, which turned into also a social crisis, which is a crisis of 2008. And when the Renzi government started, growth in Italy was minus 2.3%. And this year, we will end up this year with plus 1%. The faster the more effective we will be in increasing growth in Italy, the faster we will be also in creating jobs for youth.
What Italy are you discussing about? Sorry, it's not our Italy what you are telling now.
No.
I mean, if you look at the real statistics, are the opposite of what you said.
This is the Italy of the statistics.
Sorry, we had the highest peak of youth unemployment of our history during the Renzi mandate. So I don't know what we are talking about. And when you say that the growth is coming back, and we were in a negative trend, it's the opposite of the truth again.
What is the growth rate? What is the growth rate in Italy? Mario, what is the growth rate in Italy?
Hold on.
What is the growth rate in Italy?
I don't know.
Sandra,
I don't know.
I don't know.
No. I'm saying,
gentlemen, we're going to...
I don't know what you are talking about when you
don't know what the growth rate is in our country.
I'm not answering to you.
Gentlemen, the chair...
Gentlemen,
the chair is inviting you to pause for a moment so that we can invite, amongst others, Natalie to come in with her response to Chiara Giuliani's question.
I mean, I would say that, I wouldn't put the focus so much on where is it the government has to spend on in terms of economic sectors. That has all sorts of market distorting effects. I would have praise to make for the Jobs Act for many of the reasons that Sandra was raising, where I think the previous government, and not only the previous government, even what came before that, made a mistake on, is actually on the education side. I think that our education system and the attempts at reforming our education system are essentially tailored to an economy which doesn't reflect the Italian economy. What we're trying to do is reform our education system in an Anglo-Saxon sense, but our economy is structured actually in a way which is far more similar to, say, Germany. than the United Kingdom. And
which means what?
Which basically means this is an industrial country. And it still is an industrial country. We have an education system which is all focused on trying to get people into universities and getting degrees to get into jobs that cannot exist for everyone.
Deborah.
You know,
Can you, Chiara is asking what can be done. And so far, it seems not a great deal, very fast.
Well, you can do many things, but you have to start from reality. Economy in Italy is sluggish and has been so for a long time. And if you dare to open a new enterprise in Italy, you have to be afraid of what you're doing. There are no foreign investments in our country. And you know why? Because foreign investors perceive Italy as a place of bureaucracy and corruption, where the rules are not clear and they're not equal for everybody. Which means that for people with such a sluggish economy, there's no job. Also, for enterprises in Italy, the tax pressure is one of the highest in the Western world. And that is why one of the elements why it's so difficult to be an entrepreneur in this country. Also, it is true.
You're talking about tax cuts, amongst other things.
In terms of tax, in terms of bureaucracy, because bureaucracy, you have the hands of the state everywhere if you want to do something in Italy. And this is impossible, because otherwise what you do, you just sit down and wait for somebody else to do something, because you have no strength enough left, because you have to fight against your state. So everything in this country seems to be against having people a job. It seems almost like they want to facilitate people not to work, to stay at home and maybe earn some money from the state and be happy with that. I don't think that is fair.
There are all sorts of responses from the panel, and you hear murmurs from the audience too. Anyone got a thought about this? Yes, there's a hand up over there. Yep.
I think lots of jobs are protected by a monopoly, and therefore there's no meritocracy, and that's a huge problem. For example, I teach English. I have a master's from Cambridge University. I've won the concorso, but my qualification isn't recognised.
You speak English very clearly. Are you English as it happens, or British?
I am second-generation Italian.
Second-generation Italian?
Yes.
Thank you. OK, I want to move on to our next question, please, which comes from Alessandra. I'm sorry, I don't have your family name with me.
My name is Alessandra De Leonardo. The question is there a constitutional solution to get through the corruption?
We touched on corruption before, and it's endemic and deep-seated and is a major drag on the economy, leave aside its social and individual consequences. Deborah Bergamini.
Well, I think that the solution should be, first of all, that of developing in this country a culture that is not yet developed, of being part of a community and not of being only single beings that have to take the utmost benefit from what's around. We are lacking that because our union is relatively recent and we still have a long way to go in terms of really feeling as a community where the public good is the personal good.
You say our union is relatively recent. It's in the order of 130 plus years, isn't it? But that is in Italian history, of course, in your judgment, very recent.
Of course. In Italian history is relatively recent. We come from a structure in our country that is completely different from the big empires of colonial age. The history of Italy should be told in detail, but it would take impossible time today to explain how difficult it is. The second thing is bureaucracy. Of course, I mean, it's proven that where the bureaucracy is more pervasive, then corruption grows. We have a long tradition of corruption in this country, and so far we still haven't succeeded in fighting for good against that. And I think that this is really the most dramatic thing, because we are perceived as a corrupt country, and I cannot accept it as an Italian to be perceived such as that. But unless we cut bureaucracy, we still have corruption everywhere.
In that context of perception, as you describe it, and I don't mean this in any way personally, of course, but most people around the world, when you say that, they remember a prime minister who was committed and found guilty of fraud and had to have a sentence. And that name is Berlusconi. And so people think, if the Prime Minister is committed for fraud, isn't it inevitable that this is riven through politics, riven through every part of the upper class, if you like, of the establishment? Very difficult to escape from that charge, isn't it?
Not difficult if you are Italian, but I can understand that if you are not an Italian, you are not very clear what happened. And then you would have to explain why then, if it was such a negative figure, Berlusconi would win elections with so great results. No, the thing is that Berlusconi was not very much liked by the establishment in Italy, and that is very true.
Are you saying he wasn't guilty? Are you saying he wasn't guilty?
Something that is reminding me of how Trump is being perceived today, no? He won democratically elections, but
he was the forerunner of Trump?
He was not very much liked by the establishment in this country.
He is sort of Trump's St. John the Baptist.
Right after, don't oblige me to say things that I'm not saying, please. He has been very much not liked by the establishment, and in this establishment there were many figures who just didn't recognize that he was able to run the country.
Okay.
So if you ask me, I can tell you what he claims, that that sentence was extremely unfair, that he was accused of something that he didn't do, and that he's waiting for a sentence of the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. That we'll have to clarify if that sentence was fair or not. So if we believe in the justice system, we have to wait for that. Otherwise, we can say that he was guilty because we don't like him, and that's perfectly free for people to do.
We know what the court's finding was. It will go to the other court, and we'll see what happens. Natalie Tocci, is there a constitutional solution to this endemic problem?
Well, I'm not sure it's a constitutional solution. I mean, I think there is certainly, as far as the law is concerned, what there ought to be is a far greater criminalization of corruption. But I do take up a point that, the first point I think that Deborah was making about bureaucracy. It is extremely easy to be corrupt in this country because the bureaucracy and public administration is so complex and so intricate, and therefore you can get by without anyone noticing.
With what we call backhanders.
Exactly.
English, yeah.
But also, secondly, if you actually do want to abide by the law, it's extremely difficult. It's very difficult in this country to actually do and behave as a lawful citizen.
Why?
Because the law at times is unclear, rules are unclear, the information is not available, you phone up to try and figure out what you have to do and no one answers. It's extremely difficult if you want to have any kind of activity to figure out what you have to do.
I'm afraid I have to ask us to pause there. We're going to be back with our Italian panel and our audience in Rome for more World Questions very soon.
We'll bring you the latest from the newsroom in a couple of minutes, but first, a journey of discovery across the BBC World Service.
It will inspire you.
It's because of women like her that have opened doors in people's minds up to accepting women like me.
Surprise you.
She had permission to carry the duck onto the plane.
Make you think.
In a worst case, this would be the single largest, most complex humanitarian operation in the world.
It will introduce you to the amazing.
I chose to change things so that no other human being would be held in solitary confinement for 44 years.
And take you to the extraordinary.
And then I felt my ears popping, which means that the air is leaving the space station. I realized this may be my last breath.
Discover a whole world of people, stories and debate, all in one place. The BBC World Service newsletter brings you a daily selection of highlights from across the globe. To sign up, go to bbcworldservice.com/newsletter.
This is the BBC World Service. I'm Jonathan Dimbleby, and you're listening to World Questions from Rome. We are in the heart of the city, discussing some of the issues that lie behind the current political and economic challenges besetting the Italian nation. We're debating Italy's constitutional referendum, unemployment, corruption, migration, and the future of the European Union, not least for this remarkable country. Stay with us for further World Questions right after the news.
BBC News with Marion Marshall. The US President-elect Donald Trump has prompted the outrage of politicians and entertainers after criticising a veteran civil rights campaigner and Democratic congressman who questioned his election victory. John Lewis said he did not consider Mr. Trump a legitimate president and would not attend the inauguration on Friday. In response, Mr. Trump said Mr. Lewis was all talk, no action. China's foreign ministry has stated that the One China principle is the non-negotiable basis for its relations with the United States. In a statement posted on the foreign ministry website, it urged what it called relevant parties in the United States to recognise the sensitivity of the Taiwan issue. The Serbian Prime Minister, Aleksandar Vučić, has accused Kosovo of preparing what he called war games by getting ready to stop a newly inaugurated train service between Belgrade and a Serbian part of northern Kosovo. The Russian-made train is covered with the slogan "Kosovo is Serbian," painted in 20 languages. Mr. Vučić said he ordered the train to halt before crossing into Kosovo. The Italian Coast Guard says nearly 100 people are missing after a boat packed with migrants sank off the Libyan coast. The agency's press office said at least 8 people had died. 4 have been rescued. More than 30 African heads of state have attended the Africa-France summit in Mali and discussed the political deadlock in the Gambia. Adama Barrow, who beat the incumbent Yahya Jammeh in last month's presidential election, met the French President François Hollande as well as West African leaders. The private rocket firm SpaceX has launched a Falcon 9 rocket from California, successfully placing a constellation of satellites in orbit. SpaceX officials say they took corrective action after one of its vehicles exploded on a Florida launch pad in September. SpaceX says it plans more rocket launches worth more than $10 billion. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Dimbleby. This is the BBC World Service, and you are listening to World Questions. We are in Rome with our partners, the British Council, to discuss the challenges facing Italy a few short weeks after Prime Minister Matteo Renzi left office following a decision by the Italian electorate to reject his proposals for constitutional reform. On our panel, Sandra Gozzi, Under-Secretary to the Prime Minister with responsibility for European affairs. Deborah Bergamini, member of the Chamber of Deputies, where she represents Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia. Natalie Tocci, Chief Advisor to the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs. And Manlio Di Stefano is in the Chamber of Deputies as well as a member of the Five Stars movement. Sandra Gozzi, you are in this government. Obviously, you oppose corruption. Alessandra wants to know, is there any way through this? It's been going, we heard, Deborah said it's been, 130 years and it's not gone away. Is there a constitutional, any solution to it?
The paradox that there was an answer in the constitutional reform which was rejected by the Italian people, because if there was one major pillar of the reform was simplify the relations between state and region, and at the regional level there is one big production of corruption for the bureaucratic reason that Deborah and Natalie were evoking. So sometimes there can be a partial constitutional answer, but then people say no for the reason, see the debate above. We won't come back on that. You need certainly new legislative instrument, and we have introduced new legislative instrument which had been repealed by the Berlusconi government, because there is a new anti-crime legislation in the business sector that we have introduced on money laundering, against those who falsify the budget. This is all new legislation, all piece of new legislation that we have introduced in the last 2 years exactly to fight against this cancer. There we have introduced also a new anti-corruption agency with vast power, chaired by a very good and well-known magistrate judge, which is Raffaele Cantone. And this agency has vast power for preventing corruption, for examining, for example, the public tender, and also for cooperating with the prosecutor. So we have taken measures. It is clear that it is true that the more the system is complex, the more the system is bureaucratic, the better lie is of crime. On this, certainly, I agree with what has been said. This is why we have to pursue the reform of the public administration to make it much more simple.
Manlio Di Stefano, the Five Stars movement berates the problem that those who are corrupt, but do you have any solution to the problem?
Absolutely, yes. First of all, I will say that that is a dramatic problem that Italy has. Just consider that it costs to us up to 60 billion per year. That's up to the statistics. And when you talked before about where do you take money for doing this, that's one of the answer. You can fight corruption, for example. And I will say that you have different solutions. One is, it was already discussed. It means if you have a bad example in the politics, consider that we had in our parliament something like 70 condemned people, and in Italy it looks like normal. I mean, nobody fights for that. So people will realize that corruption is something that is part of our normal life.
When you say condemned, people have been found guilty of charges relating to corruption.
They were into the parliament, within us, I would say. Not us in this table, obviously. And so, I hope so. Our solutions are, first of all, you have to protect and introduce the figure of the whistleblower without being, fired by your employer or something like this. And we don't have this. Then you have to reform the statute of limitation, because in Italy, most of the trials, they finish without any judgment, because you have a wrong statute of limitations.
So you can go on being charged for much more than 10 years, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it is very important for me to say that when Gozzi talks about the reform that they already did, this reform never touched the so-called white collars. And those are the first having corruption in Italy. So this is very important to us.
Okay, Manlio, your movement won power in this capital city of Rome. Mm-hmm. Your mayor is under extreme political pressure because of allegations of precisely what you are, only allegations. Members of the staff who are either under investigation or have withdrawn from their posts in the administration.
That's not true.
You can add that an advisor is already in prison.
That's not true.
You can add that an advisor to Mayor Raggi is already in prison.
Gozzi, don't spread fake news, please.
No.
First of all, we don't have any member of the Five Star, elected member of the Five Star Movement, or even nominated member of the Five Star Movement under any kind of trial.
I'm talking about employees that are employed in the administration. Are you saying there was no one under investigation in the administration of this capital city?
Our elected people, absolutely, yes, nobody.
The head of refuse collection, for example?
There is one guy, it's called Marra, that was already in the, it is an employee of the municipality, that was already under the municipality with Alemanno and then with the PD, the last mandate of the PD in this municipality, that got arrested for things done under the right-wing government of the city, so nothing related to our management of the city.
Minister, why are you laughing at that?
I'm laughing because he's talking about the right hand of Mayor Raggi.
You call it like this.
He's talking about the right hand of Mayor Raggi. This is the guy he's talking about.
You define it like this, but it's not true.
No, she defined it like this. She defined it like this in June. She said this in June.
Truth is sometimes in the eye of the beholder. Let me bring in Natalie. I know you will want to listen to Natalie.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what he's dying to do. He's just waiting to listen to that.
He is.
No, I mean, look, I think, frankly speaking, what is very clear is that the current mayor of the city is not doing fantastically well. She is not associated with a clean government. To what extent it is fact or fiction, I'm not going to get into that debate, but I think, broadly speaking, this is the broad perception of the situation. First point. Second point, it is clear that the more one is in government, the more one is liable to committing crimes within public administration. So I don't think that there is any one party in this country which is cleaner by definition than another.
Everyone's agreed on this panel that corruption is endemic and it's very serious. What answer do you have to that problem? Anyone in this audience, what would you do? Down here, first of all.
The Pope. This is the only good leader we have nowadays in Italy.
I would vote for him.
The Pope for Prime Minister, down here.
Well, as an Italian living in Germany, I deal with much more bureaucracy in Germany rather than in Italy. So the difference between Italy and Germany is that in Germany things work much better because they
So what would you do?
avoid duplication. So a constitutional reform, a reform at any level, which would avoid the duplication of decisions and the duplication of voices talking about the same thing, would do a lot.
The woman with glasses and reddish hair?
Yeah.
Sorry,
yes.
I probably not described its elegance adequately.
Yeah. What I think is that there is no quick solution to the problem of corruption, because we're not really speaking about some technical problems, but about a cultural problem, and we should stop from schools. So if we hire teachers in a fair way, and we teach kids to behave well in school and not to copy other people's work and stuff like that, people do grow up thinking and knowing how to behave fairly, and then they become politicians that have been grown up like that.
Okay, I'm going to leave some of those thoughts in the wind, and we would like to go, please, straight to our next question, which comes from Alphonse Apicella.
Hi, everybody. I guess my question is, if you had to launch a political campaign on migration, seeing as this is a burning issue, what key message or key messages would you want to get across to communicate? Thank you.
If you had to launch a campaign on migration, seeing that this is a burning issue, what key message would you want to get across? And again, for our global audience, some 160,000 individuals in 2016 alone migrated across the Mediterranean to Italy, and some 5,000, despite the best efforts of the European Union and the Italian Navy itself, died in the Mediterranean on their way to this country. Let me start with you on this. What message do you think, Natalie Tocci, would you want to get across?
Well, let me say the one message which I think should get across, and which I think none of the parties will get across and will want to get across, and that is the very simple message that it is impossible to stop the flow of migration, to halt the flow of migration. The challenge that we have is that of transforming the current flow of migrants and refugees from an irregular flow into a regular flow. That is a message that will not be made by any party, because indeed what sells politically is the idea that to deal with the issue we will stop it, we will expel irregular migrants. Well, that is impossible to do unless you have a readmission agreement, which we have with a very few number of countries, and we will have less and less, because what is the incentive of those countries to sign readmission agreements with us or with anyone else for that matter? So it is simply selling a lie. So the point is, how can we transform an irregular flow, which can be very dangerous precisely because you do not know who is coming in and who is not, into a regular one in which you know and adapt your system in order to integrate these people into the job market.
When you say it's impossible to stop it, that is because, in some, why?
Well, in some, because people are like water. They find a way of getting in, if that is what their incentive is. And if their incentive is driven by the need to survive, they will find a way in, and we will not stop it. It's the history of humanity, by the way. It's not a European problem. It's not a Middle East problem or African problem.
What is the Five Stars movement's take on this, Manlio Di Stefano?
Well, going back to the question, if I could say the slogan could be no slogan, let's have some solution. I agree with you. It's not possible, not even to say it, because you cannot stop it, unless you just stop bombing the Middle East, for example. And so I will take you different levels. One is the geopolitical level. At the geopolitical level, if we wouldn't have bombed Libya in 2011 and destabilized Syria for the last 5 years, maybe we will have less migrants nowadays. That's something I think it's clear.
Can I just interrupt on that point? Yes, you're right. If we hadn't bombed Libya, there wouldn't be people coming from sub-Saharan Africa. What was the situation, though, before 2011? That those people were simply stopping in Libya. So it was okay for us, because we could turn the other way.
Libya was stopping the other countries' migrants, not the. We have also the Libyans.
Well, that is hardly a problem. Mainly the people coming through Libya are not Libyans.
That's why I'm going to the next level. That is the European Union level. If you have multilateral agreements, you can use cooperation and because most of the country where they're coming from, they need cooperation with the European Union. We already had something, like we can have more. And then you had to review the Dublin regulation, because it's, I think it's absolutely crazy. How can you sign, being a southern Mediterranean country, an agreement saying that the first country of arrival has to take care of all the papers of the migrants? It makes no sense. I mean, just five countries are dealing with the 90% of the requests for asylum seekers. So what I think is, you cannot stop it, but you can't regulate it. And this is not something that is not done by this government, for example. We did nothing about migration. And even in the European Union, the discussion going on over there, they are not taking care about the differences between the southern European countries and the northern one.
Well, they are
it's
trying
clear
to.
that
This
Germany, for example, I know where you're going, one moment. Germany is taking care of the double of our migrants, for example, but they are not facing the problem of the emergency. I mean, we spend a lot of money and we have a lot of empathic pressure because we are facing the death and we are in the sea and we are having the emergency.
Manlio, let me bring in Deborah.
Well, I think that the migration issue is probably the most terrible failure of the EU.
So
but
what would your message be? What would your message be?
That this is a lose-lose situation. Thousands of people die trying to cross the Mediterranean. The people who arrive here believe they are in paradise, while they find all sluggish economies, jobless rates that are very high, so no possibility of being in the real job market, which means that we have a pressure of hundreds of thousands of people with no perspectives coming in a very short time, and thus changing the social profile of entire countries. That's a social bomb.
So given that Natalie says you can't stop the flow, do you think you can stop the flow?
Well, there will be a moment when it will be less convenient to come to Europe, and then the flow will stop. But we cannot wait for that.
Have to get pretty bad
we cannot wait for that. But this always happens with if you study the migration fluxes. This is always a matter of economic, but we cannot wait for that. I think that, first of all, bilateral agreements. When we were at the government, those proved to be working, and they worked, because we stopped the migration coming, because we were dealing bilaterally. The second thing is that we have...
Sorry to interrupt you, but can you deal bilaterally with Syria at the moment?
No, you cannot do that with Syria. I'm referring to Northern African countries, of course. Syria is a completely different situation.
Can you sign a readmission agreement with a country that does not abide by the Geneva Conventions?
You have to deal with the problem. If you keep on being perfect, try to be perfect and be along the line.
It's simply abiding by international law.
And I think that the government is doing well with this. The second thing is that we have to have a completely different approach to Africa. It is true, cooperation is okay, but it's not enough. We have to take away all the barriers to the market and to our relation, a commercial relation with African countries, in order to allow them to be able to become real economies.
Minister, you're asked by Alphonse Apicella what your key message would be on this.
Well, it's not a question of key messages of campaigning, it's a question of action, which is already going on in a very difficult context. And basically, they are all saying the same thing with a different approach. And the thing that they are saying, and it is the way we are trying to work, is that you must handle this fundamental problem at two levels. You must handle it at national levels, and you must handle it at European level. At European level, European action is disappointing. It is disappointing because I do not believe that the European Union is already using all its potential political and economic weight to obtain from the country of origin a different relation and more cooperation. We are pushing the European Union to go toward that direction. We have proposed, and we are negotiating now with different African countries.
Which countries are key countries in this?
Nigeria, Mali, Eritrea.
Can I ask you one thing?
No, I would like to say what I think. So we are working, and we must do much more with this migration compact, which is an attempt of new approach to the issue of migration, where you combine a new approach to the local development. You must do much more on borders control. And this is another thing that we have been calling upon for 2.5 years. Finally, the European Union has decided to create a new border police. We are at the beginning, 1,500 policemen from all over Europe to patrol the external border is a step ahead. We have to continue to work. And at the third level, burden sharing, because it is true, the current asylum rules existing in Europe are obsolete because they were conceived for the Balkan wars, and the world has completely changed. So now we are in the midst of a very difficult negotiation to revise the so-called Dublin regulation, asylum regulation, and we have to obtain more burden sharing, because if someone lands on our coast and is seeking asylum to the European Union, it is not fair that only Italy and Greece must carry out the weight. From this perspective, I would like the European Commission, as the European Commission is very prompt to open a case against Italy, for example, for technical things on the way we take fingerprinting of the asylum seeker, because they were so smart, to open an infringement procedure against Italy for this. I would like the European Commission to open an infringement procedure against Hungary, against Poland, against all those countries who are not complying with their obligation on asylum.
Alessandra Fidanza, your question, please.
It's very short. Is there a real future for Europe without Great Britain?
I think, Sandro Gozzi, you said that you're quoted as saying that Britain's vote to leave has started the bloc's, quotes, disintegration.
Yes, there is a high risk of disintegration. The disintegration of European Union has already started at the moment where the British people decide to leave, because we are losing a very important members of the European Union, which is the United Kingdom. I do believe that we have to stop the disintegration process by relaunching the European integration, and this is one of the objectives to which we would like to contribute also in few weeks. On the 25th of March here in Rome, we will celebrate 60 years of the Treaty of Rome. We would like to see that occasion to relaunch the process. I have to say, even if I'm on the BBC, that yes, I'm afraid there is a future for European Union without UK. Well, I'm afraid that the future of UK without European Union would be a much worse future. And I do believe that we have to be brave enough, sensible enough, both on this, on the other side of the channel, to handle the Brexit negotiation with a very effective damage limitation approach. Because the damages can be very high on both parties. It's not true that it is a new opportunity. It is not true, which is a new opportunity. It is a possible very high damage. We have to do a smart, effective damage limitation in the negotiation of Brexit.
Thank you. Deborah, what's your view, your party's view for Italia?
Well, of course, we regretted very much the decision of the British people, but we respected, of course, to leave the European Union. But we understood why the UK people, for most part, chose to abandon the EU. Because the EU has not, has not proved to be effective in terms of the expectations that it had posed. And the British people chose freely and showed that they felt not part of that architecture building, of that union. So far, the most important success of the European Union in terms of foreign policy has been the enlargement process. Now we see that that big success is turning on the contrary, because we are experiencing members that choose to leave, or that, the case of Greece, risk to be left by the European Union. Of course, this means that the architecture of the European Union is failing, is not effective, and that is why the future is so foggy. It's up to the major political forces represented in the European Union to prove that they can make a quantum leap and find a different sense for the whole architecture. Otherwise, I don't see any very great future for the European Union.
Manlio Di Stefano.
I think that the EU dream is hostage of terrible political leaders. And I think that the Brexit was made of the discouragement that was on the British people, that they never realized what was the advantage of being part of the EU, and that's why they left. So I think that the EU dream could be reestablished, but you have to really change the approach that you have on it. I'm part also of the Council of Europe, and I listen to the arguments, to the topics also on the European Parliament. Nobody is taking care of what was the meaning of the Brexit, of the referendum. They are just talking on how to get rid of the United Kingdom as soon as they can. So if you don't deal with the cause of the problem, you will have other problems like this in the future. So that's my idea. We have no more than 10 years, meaning that you have to change the leaders' approach to the EU. If you establish a EU based on the original principles, so freedom of movement, democracy, social welfare, we could start talking about the minimum income and all other very important things for people, you will fix it and you will save it. Otherwise, you will lose it, because the Brexit was, the starting point of the ball running down, and this will bring together other countries.
And finally, is there a future for Europe in the absence of the UK's membership of the EU? Natalie Tocci.
Well, short answer is yes, there is. I personally, and I agree with Sandro here, to me, Brexit was a terrible loss for both the United Kingdom and for the European Union. But let's be very clear, the United Kingdom has never been an integral element of European integration. Had it been a Frexit, then my answer would very clearly have been a no.
If it had been French?
Yes. In the case of the United Kingdom, I think it's a terrible loss, but at the same time, I think that the EU can survive without it. Now, the question is, how can it survive without it? I think what's already interesting is that after the UK referendum, polls on the EU in other EU countries have actually been going up. Support for the European Union has actually been going up. So the domino effect is not there. But it's clear that one needs to have a European project that inspires, that connects to citizens. But let me also say that there is a very deep and huge responsibility of national political leaders to stop this EU bashing. Enough of this EU bashing. It is clear that there will never be a union that will be able to reconnect to citizens so long as the union is the favourite punchy bag, basically, for all national political leaders.
Thank you. We could go on that as on the other issues we're discussing, but I'm afraid that's it for this edition of World Questions from Rome. So from the Piazza d'Espagna, on behalf of my producer, Charlie Taylor, the BBC World Service, our partners, the British Council, and me, thank you very much to our panel, to those who asked the questions here, and to our audience here and listening elsewhere. Goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service. The news is next. But first, a quick word from Harriet Gilbert.
For next month's World Book Club, I'll be joined by the Colombian author Laura Restrepo to talk about her novel Delirium, the winner of the prestigious Alfaguara Prize. It's a beautiful and unsettling book in which a man returns home from a business trip to find that his beloved wife has lost control of her sanity.
World Book Club, from the 5th of February. And in an hour on The Inquiry...
I'm Helena Merriman. We're off in search for alien life. As more projects are announced to try to make contact with extraterrestrials, we'll be speaking to pioneers of the search as we ask, is there anybody out there?
Online at bbcworldservice.com, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm Anu Anand. African leaders try to find a peaceful way out for Gambia's president. If he doesn't go voluntarily, how do Gambians feel about the threat of military intervention?
That has created a lot of chaos because that creates a situation of panic and people leave.
Also, railroad diplomacy. Serbia tries to send a train decked out in nationalist colours into Kosovo, creating fresh tensions.
This train proves that any minor event can lead to a further conflict and further exchange of very ugly words and statements.
Attempts to unlock the potential of workers with autism.
My position on the spectrum means I filter out pretty much everything except the puzzle.
And which photographs define the first black American president? Let us know at BBC NewsHour on Twitter. First, the news.
Hello, I'm Marianne Marshall with the BBC News. Politicians and entertainers in the United States have rallied to the defence of a veteran civil rights campaigner and Democratic congressman who's become embroiled in a row with the president-elect, Donald Trump. Laura Bicker has the details.
John Lewis has spent most of his life fighting for racial equality, and he's now become the first leading Democrat to publicly question Donald Trump's right to govern. He told NBC's Meet the Press that he did not see the Republican as a legitimate president and that he thought the Russians had helped him get elected. Mr. Trump responded on Twitter saying the congressman should spend more time fixing his crime-ridden district than complaining about the election results. But his tweets drew sharp criticism on this holiday weekend, which honours Martin Luther King. Hundreds of politicians and entertainers have leapt to the defence of Mr. Lewis and described him as a hero.
China's foreign ministry has stated that the One China principle is the non-negotiable basis for its relations with the United States. In a statement posted on the foreign ministry website, it urged what it called relevant parties in the United States to recognise the sensitivity of the Taiwanese